Okay, our first speaker is Dolmen Domikles, and he's representing, well, he should tell you who he's representing. Dolmen, wherever you are.
Hello, everybody. I feel very honoured to be here. My name is Dolmen Domikles, and I'm here on behalf of Extinction Rebellion Lewes. I've lived in Lewes for about 17 years now, and before that I was a North Londoner. I grew up in 1950s England, safe. I had an English father, and my mother and my grandparents had fled from Nazi Germany. But somehow I never felt safe. And I think I inherited this knowledge that this world that can seem so secure and solid to us can just disappear, because that's exactly what happened to the community that my mother grew up in. And I felt I wanted to show you some pictures to evoke that world, really. There's a picture of my mother with my grandfather and my grandmother, Ludwig and Julia. They're in their garden. It would probably be just before the First World War. And I guess life seemed very safe and solid in this little village or this town in southern Germany. A third of the population were Jewish, and I gather it was a very integrated community. And yeah, this is my mother with a couple of friends. I have a sense of it being very, very normal, and it feels very important to me when thinking about the Holocaust to remember not just about the people who died, but about the energy of people's lives when they were alive. I couldn't resist this one, this fantastic car, but it's also my great-grandfather, Dr. Simon Nördlinger, who was the village doctor. That's why he needed the car. Before that, he had a horse and cart, because he'd get a messenger come in the night. He'd have to get up any time in the day and night and go to the surrounding villages to see his patients. And that's my mum in the middle, and his wife, Rosa, who's sitting on the passenger seat. And there's Rosa. My mother was called Martha, and her grandmother. And now many years later, my mother, she escaped Germany and escaped Hitler and managed to get to Palestine with her first husband. And some of the family managed to get out to the States when things were getting rough. And she was busy trying to get visas for her family to come to Palestine, which was really difficult. And she couldn't get a visa for Rosa because she was too old. This is Aunt Alice. So my grandmother had 3 sisters, all the daughters of Dr. Nördlinger, and they all had husbands, but Alice's husband died young of a heart attack. Alice was a widow, and she had a visa. My mum got her a visa, and she had this awful choice to make. Could she leave for Palestine with her 2 sons and leave her mother behind, the only one of the family left behind? Or should she stay with her mother and leave her sons, her young sons, going to Palestine? They were teenagers. And what a decision to have to make. And she decided that she would stay in Germany with Rosa. And they were in Buchau. The rest of the family had gone, had left, and things were getting really tough. And finally, they were rounded up with everyone else that was left, and put in cattle trucks, and they were sent to Theresienstadt. And the journey was so awful that actually Rosa died as soon as she arrived, and maybe that was a deliverance. And but Aunt Alice was in Theresienstadt. She'd been a nurse in the First World War, looking after German soldiers. And so she was in the sick bay, but eventually she was transported to Auschwitz, and she was murdered. But as I said, I think it's also important to remember these were just ordinary families. This is my family. That's my mother in the middle as a teenager with her mum and dad, her little brother. There's Aunt Alice, and the other person on the extreme on the edge. I don't know who she is. And this is a weekend trip to swim in the Danube, which was the local river. And in recent years, I went back to Buchau with my family. And there we are. And we think that's the exact spot because it was written up in the photo album where it was. And we went there. And this is by the side of the Danube. So we felt that we were kind of taking our place in Germany again. So I thought, yeah, just give a few images of what life was like and what that world was that has disappeared. Because when we're learning about climate change, we learn about worlds will disappear, sometimes literally under the sea. And once more, whole populations will flee and seek refuge. And the established population will think about, gosh, how many of these aliens can we afford to let in? Is everything all right with the sound? I wonder if everyone could just make sure they're on mute, because anything you're saying where you are will actually come out as the loudest sound and everyone will hear it. So the population's thinking, gosh, there are all these people roaming around. How many can we let in? And this is happening now. And this is a familiar story for families who've been affected by the Holocaust. So yes, I'm part of Extinction Rebellion Lewes. What are the lessons that we can learn? And are there any similarities around what's happening in climate change and how we respond to it and the Holocaust? So I am learning more and more about how climate change came about. At first, I thought it was mainly caused by, yes, carbon dioxide emissions due to the Industrial Revolution, as well as careless exploitation of rainforests. And the idea of climate justice suggested that the global south was unfortunate enough to be at the rough end of this process, caused mainly by pollution from the global north. But the more I learn, the more I feel I understand that at the core of the climate crisis is the deliberate dehumanizing and exploitation of people. The more I learn about the structure of the economic system that caused and is still causing climate change, I learn how it is inextricably bound up with economic injustice, social injustice, and racism. And this is stuff that's really coming home to me, at the end of last year. And I think, learning from Black Lives Matters really got me thinking about this climate justice and learning more. So, and I'm going to show you another a picture, which hopefully will, oh my goodness, has it disappeared?
You've only got a few minutes left.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, sorry, I'm trying to share my screen now. Sorry, it's a technical hitch. It was just a way of illustrating that. So that really this exploitation, it's just a continuation of colonialism. So I'm getting the feeling that our ecosystem being out of control is far from being a car out of control. It's actually being driven by very rich and powerful forces who are committed to benefit from the collapse of the world as we know it, while keeping safe sanctuaries for themselves. And the millions of mainly Black people and people of color who will die or become refugees will in their turn be seen as these dangerous hordes of people threatening what's left of our communities in the global north. And the language around climate refugees is already very dehumanizing. So I hope you can see where I'm going with this. How much longer have I got, Gaby? Okay, I'll just carry on for now. So I think there's something about the Holocaust. My sense is it was caused by dangerous narcissistic men trying to become insanely powerful, using a strategy of distracting the ordinary people that they're exploiting and leading to destruction. And they're doing this by othering, victimizing, and destroying vulnerable groups of people. So in the Holocaust, we know that these groups were Jews, Gypsies, gay people, and other groups. And now the vulnerable groups that we are encouraged not to care about are people from the countries that Western Europe and the United States have exploited for years through their empires. And I'm aware I may well be sounding quite paranoid to some people, but I think, you know, in 1930, if you'd suggested Hitler was going to do what he was going to do, I think people would have thought that you were being paranoid then. And it may well sound quite extreme to people, but yeah, I'm a 68-year-old man. I didn't understand all this 5 years ago. I'm waking up now, and in Extinction Rebellion, we're all waking up and trying to wake up other people to this, as the different speakers here tonight are waking us up. And I think it's like people needed to wake up in the 1930s to face up to the evil that was about to shatter their world.
Thank you, Dolmen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. And the next speaker is David Burke from Amnesty International.
It always helps to unmute. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Amnesty International is a well-known human rights organization, and my name is David Burke. I'm the secretary, and we have a local group in Lewes. Amnesty was started at a time that, if we look back on it, it's almost sort of blissfully simple. There was the Cold War. There was sort of democracy and capitalism versus communism, and these two systems both trying to prove that they were the best. And as a human rights organization, your job was actually quite straightforward. All you had to do was point to the hypocrisy. You had to point to what they were doing wrong. You had to point to the tin pot dictator they were backing and say, look, you know, you say your system's so good, look at you. You know, this isn't any good at all. And they would be terribly embarrassed. And hopefully that would be a very powerful thing. But I think we're now in a kind of different situation that has radically changed for a number of reasons, the internet and so forth, and it has built up over time, so that simple equation of wanting to show that you're doing the right thing and then being called out for doing the wrong thing, that's not as powerful or as effective as it used to be. And I want to focus on an example of this. And I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that'll all work. Okay. Can everybody see the article? Little picture, Trump demands apology. Can everyone see that? Okay. Okay, so Donald Trump is obviously the kind of test case for this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Trump and what happened in the last 4 years. During which time we started, the local Lewes Amnesty Group started a campaign called American Crisis about human rights violations in the United States. So what happened was Trump got elected, on a Tuesday. Then there were some protests. The left didn't like it. They said, we refuse to believe this. Then that died down. And about a week later, we had this. We had Vice President Mike Pence, and he went to New York City with his wife and saw the musical Hamilton, which is about the founding fathers of America, but played by an ethnically diverse cast with hip hop music. And at the end of, that was a sort of interesting destination. And at the end of the show, they bring up the lights, and one of the main cast of characters comes out and he makes a speech directly to Pence sitting in the audience saying, you know, as you can see here, we are the diverse Americans, anxious that you will not protect us. So from that actor's point of view, he felt he was making a strong blow, a strong statement to the powers that be. But of course, Trump and Pence were playing a sort of bigger game, because what they knew was that when the rest of the country saw intellectual theater-going New Yorkers lecturing the newly elected Vice President of the United States, who was from Indiana, they would see something different. They would see the intellectual elite talking down to the red-blooded Americans, the real Americans in the country. And that was the bigger story that Trump and Pence were trying to engineer. Similarly, a couple of weeks later, or no, this was no, a year later, Trump Trump sends Mike Pence to a football game. At this point, Colin Kaepernick was refusing to stand for the national anthem to protest police brutality against young black men. Pence goes to the game knowing full well that he's not going to see the game. He arrives, they do the Pledge of Allegiance. Colin Kaepernick doesn't stand, and so Mike Pence, looking wounded and hurt and patriotic, turns around, gets in his car, and goes home. And then Trump demands an apology from the San Francisco 49ers for allowing this to happen. And what happens is, so what is this game they were playing? They were playing a game where anybody protesting, anybody calling public figures to do the right thing could also be made fun of. It was like a judo flip. You call me out, you ask me to do the right thing, I'll judo flip you. I'll make it seem that you're elite, that you're unpatriotic, that you're the one breaking up the country. And this is something that Trump did repeatedly. He also had a habit of whenever things were going bad, if some bad job numbers came out, or if the Mueller report came out with something that was going to cause him some trouble, he would go on TV and say something racist. He would say something upsetting. He would say something scandalous. These are all the kind of things that politicians have always tried to avoid. They make you look bad. They cause people to be angry at you. But for Trump, obviously it worked. And I think we all are familiar by now with this strange game that they played. That the more that as the writer David Frum said, the outrages will distract you from the scandals. There are things happening underneath, but you won't notice them because you're so busy responding to whatever outrage Trump manages to whip up. And this was I think we need a mute. But I think this was Trump sort of showing a little picture of himself beating up CNN like a wrestler, a professional wrestler, and it was that history. Trump had a lot of sort of connections to the professional wrestling business. It was that idea that you create the spectacle, you create the fake spectacle, and it disorients everybody. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? You trot people out, and suddenly nobody makes sense anymore. Everybody just seems like they're in it for some sort of political gain, and nobody has the moral high ground. And that was what Trump was able to do very effectively in the beginning of his term. Was just kind of destroy the moral high ground, so that nobody, everybody just looked like a political player. But of course, things really, real things were happening. It's not all just culture wars. So underneath the radar, as it were, the Trump administration passed a law saying that ICE, their immigration police, could operate anywhere within 100 miles of a U.S. border.
We've only got a couple more minutes.
Oh no, really? Okay. Well, basically, so this led to things like the family separation policy, children in cages, and we eventually end up with Alexia Ocasio-Cortez, calling migrant detention centers concentration camps. But that immediately led to a backlash, and this is the challenge for anyone hoping to learn lessons from the Holocaust or use the example of the Holocaust to stop further Holocausts. And there's something called Godwin's Law, this sort of internet savvy professor who pointed out that any discussion on the internet eventually will become a discussion about Hitler, and at that point the discussion ends. It no longer makes sense. And that was the problem that people had talking about this, searching around for moral certitude. They would grab on to things like the Nazis or the Holocaust, but that would immediately either cause a backlash from people who felt that they were not taking the Holocaust seriously, Or on the other hand, other people would feel it was a fair comparison. And we're left with this conundrum about the Holocaust. If you apply the Holocaust to this thing and that thing, then everything becomes a Holocaust, and everybody's a Nazi, and the whole thing becomes meaningless. On the other hand, if you say, well, no, to do that is to be disrespectful of the people who died in the Holocaust, and that was a unique event in history that only happened once, well, then you've also disarmed yourself, because then you say, well, that was one thing, it happened long ago, we can't talk about it anymore. So there's nothing that can be applied to the present. So this bouncing back and forth obviously was a reason to send Mike Pence back. So Donald Trump sent Mike Pence down to the southern border to stand around looking wounded and hurt. But you can tell by this point, it wasn't working anymore.
Your time's up.
Okay.
So can you finish it very quickly?
Yeah, well, basically, I mean, here's Mike Godwin, the guy who invented Godwin's Law again. But by the time people were marching around with torches, Godwin said, well, by all means, compare these shitheads to Nazis. Again and again, I'm with you. So there came a point where even Trump could not play games anymore, and people had to take that seriously. The possibility that there was just a moral right and wrong, and that this comparison was apt. And
thank you very much, David.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. I'm sorry I've got to cut you off.
No,
but
that's
I've got to
fair
keep to
enough.
time.
Okay.
Okay, the next speaker is Paulo Almond. Paulo.
Yes, I'm here. I'm just waiting.
Oh, hi, Paulo.
Hi, hello, Gaby. Hi, everybody. As Gaby said, I'm Palo Almond. I'm a member of the Black Lives Matter group here in Seaford. And Gaby asked me to look into the Black experience in Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. So I had to get my books out and look into it. And this is some of what I found. And I'll end my talk by saying how this applies to us today with Black Lives Matter movement. So, share. So here we are. I'm talking about the Holocaust legacy. As you probably gather, we're talking about some very sensitive and potentially some very upsetting stuff. And some of the pictures I'm going to use in this presentation may also be distressing for some people. So just turn your just keep the sound on and turn your head away if you think that might happen. So let's see if I can read. Here we are. So this is a picture that probably some of you have seen before. It's a familiar picture of the gathering and of various people, Jewish people, Roma people, all sorts of different people. And the question we have to ask is, how did this happen? Could we have seen the signs before this actually happened? Well, when I started to look into Germany before Nazism, I discovered that Germany, along with many other European countries, were scrambling for a bit of Africa. And you can see here that Germany got this bit of land over here, down the south, and over on the east coast. So Germany took control of these areas of Africa. Most colonizations are born out of greed and domination of people, and Germany at that time was not any different. This is what happened to the Herero people, the people whose land Germany took over. If we had taken notice of what was happening at that time, we might have been able to foresee what might have happened to the Jewish people and other people. Herero people in the southwestern Africa were put into concentration camps and killed in great numbers. Yet, despite this, despite the brutality, many Africans did want to go to Germany and live over there. So here we have a black diaspora in Germany. They felt loyalty to the Kaiser and wanted to be part of the German army, wanted to be part of the growing industrialization of Germany. In 1933, when Hitler came to power, there were up to, well, several thousand black people living in Germany at the time. Some of them were in Rhineland, which is an area of French-occupied Germany. And the soldiers, the French soldiers, many of them were black, African, and they hooked up with the German women and had mixed-race children. And the newspapers and the German government at that time, the Nazis, called them the Rhineland bastards. And these children were forcibly and illegally sterilized under the Nazi regime of racial hygiene. A ruling also stated that black people, like Roma and other persecuted groups, were to be regarded as being of alien blood and were subject to the Nuremberg principles. Very few people of African descent in Germany at that time had German citizenship, even if they were born in Germany, as many were. They were given passports that designated them as stateless. In 1941, black children, mixed-race children were officially excluded from public schools, were not allowed to go to Germany, and weren't allowed to train in any of the professions. They also suffered medical experimentation. I won't go into too much detail about that because it's very distressing, and you probably know much of this already. They were imprisoned, and many were murdered. I do have to say, though, that there was no systematic program for the elimination or the mass internment, as there were for Jewish people and other groups like the Roma. There was none of that for the black people at the time, or the mixed race children. But as I said, they were brutalized in their own way.
You've got a few minutes, only a couple of minutes.
Okay. We do know that SS leader Heinrich Himmler undertook a survey of all black people in Germany and in occupied Europe in 1942. And we suspect he was contemplating some sort of roundup and internment. What we've got here is a picture of two children in concentration camps. And as you can see, one is a black child. There's not that much known about how many number of black people and children were in concentration camps. Very few compared to the number of other groups. And these are some of the people who we know of, and we know some of their stories, who died in concentration camps. The concentration camps were liberated by many different armies, but one of the US armies was the 761th Tank Battalion. These were all American, all black American liberators. And here you've got some of the children and some of the adults praising their rescuers. So these are some of the resources that you can look into to get more information about this. But the thing is, what I want to end by is saying that there were signs that the Holocaust could have happened. And what we need to do today is keep remembering the Holocaust, look for some of the antecedents to the Holocaust, and look for those in what's happening today with Black Lives Matter, the genocides in other parts of the world. These things are still happening, and we have to remain alert to the possibility of it getting worse. So we need to remain political and not shy away from speaking up and calling out racism, because it will escalate if we don't stop it. So I'll leave it there. Gaby, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Thank you for coming in on time, Paulo. And now it's time for Aluna to come and speak about Roma and Travellers.
Hello, hi, I hope you can hear me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to say that I'm honored to be here today, even though we're online, but still it is so important to speak about our common history and generally to remember our past so we can build a better future, hopefully. My name is Aluna, and I would like to speak about the Roma Holocaust, or the genocide that happened to the Roma people during the Second World War. I am myself a member of the Roma community, and if you are not sure or are not aware who this community is, who Roma people are, I will give you a short introduction into our community. We originate from India, and several hundred years ago, we decided to move, to migrate. I cannot give you exact reasons, but I'm sure there are scholars who can speak more about that. But we decided to migrate towards Europe and the US. On this way, definitely we faced a lot of other countries, and in some countries we stopped on our way. Those groups of Roma who stopped in certain countries, they decided to adapt the culture, the language, some cultural or like features, habits, and so on. So that's how all of us, all of the Roma groups in the entire world, we are different because we have the words and cultural features of the country we live in. We have different dialects, we have different subgroups, sometimes different customs, but still we can understand each other. Some of the words still remain the same because the basis of our language is Sanskrit. That's how here in the UK there is a group called the Gypsies, and they indeed have Indian roots like us, like Roma people have, but the difference is that they came to the UK about 500 years ago, and because of the Roma or Gypsy extermination at that time by the government, they decided to mingle with the mainstream society, so they look different, so they do not attract attention with their skin color and their like features generally. Nowadays, Gypsy have another dialect from the migrant Roma who we are. And as I said, we are like different subgroups, and I myself belong to a group that is called the Jewish Roma community. And it is quite important for the topic we speak today. And it's not because my ancestors are from Israel, but it's because during the Second World War, in the country I was born in, it's Republic of Moldova, Roma and Jews were deported to a region called Transnistria for labor and general like extermination, starvation. And in that time, the Jews and the Roma people of Moldova, of the country, decided to help each other. So they decided to hide each other, to support each other. So Roma people stopped like looking physically like Roma, and Jews stopped like having traditional Jewish occupations. In this way, they can hide from the Nazi soldiers. That's how a new generation came up, families mixed, new people came up, and that's how the Roma Jewish community appeared, and I'm one of them. Indeed, the Roma Holocaust happened in that time as well, but it is not spoken, it is not heard, people do not know about that, and there are several reasons for that, and one of them is pure documentation, and the other reason, which I want to speak like a few minutes more about that, is the mass rape of Roma women during the Second World War. And Roma being usually a traditional community, we have many taboo topics, and one of them is sexuality and rape including, so we do not speak about that. It is considered a shame. That's why my great-parents, my grandparents, great-grandparents didn't speak to us about the Holocaust or the genocide. It was linked with the word shame. However, I think it is so important to speak about that. It is important to commemorate the victims because they were, and I want everybody to know that indeed this happened. Nowadays, my colleagues from Gypsy Roma traveler communities are fighting to have the Roma Holocaust history in the school history curricula, and I hope soon we will have some good news about that. Just to emphasize this topic, to make you know that indeed this happened, and it happened in like mass killings for the Roma people, I would like to read you a few passages. And one of them is Heinrich Himmler Memorandum, which was issued on December 8, 1938. To this end, it is necessary to establish the racial affinity of every Gypsy living in Germany. I therefore decree that all settled and non-settled Gypsies are to be registered with the Reich Central Office for combating the Gypsy nuisance. The police authorities will report to this office all persons who by virtue of their looks and appearance, customs or habits are to be regarded as Gypsies or part Gypsies. A few years later, on December 16, 1942, Himmler issued an order to send all Gypsies to the concentration camps. And the next passage I would like to read out is Adolf Eichmann telegram from Vienna to the Gestapo. Regarding transport of Gypsies, be informed that on Friday, October 20, 1938, the first transport of Jews will depart Vienna. To this transport, 34 cars of Gypsies are to be attached. Subsequent trains will depart from Vienna, Maastricht, Ostrau, and Katowice. The simplest method is to attach some carloads of Gypsies to each transport. Because this transport must follow schedule, a smooth execution of this matter is expected. Most often, the German police deported Roma to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where the camp authorities housed them in special compounds that was called the Gypsy family camp, and they had different other names like Zigeuner, Lager, and this kind of things. I still have a few minutes, and I would like to read out a few two memories of people who escaped the concentration camps. And one of the memories of a Roma woman who suffered sterilization. So let me read this out for you. They cut off our hair and everything to be hairless. It was done by women. Then a doctor examined us truly. They examined, everything. He was the one who gave an injection to me and to all the other people, to everyone. It hurt badly. He gave me an injection down there. Everything went black. I fell off that examining table, but they kicked me away because it was the time for another person. They gave me an injection like that one in 8 months after that, and I didn't have that monthly thing. So that happened to many Roma women. They were sterilized, so they cannot continue, their Roma community, they can't continue to have children anymore. And the other memories of a Roma survivor from Auschwitz, and he recalls, I suddenly heard music. In the distance, violins were playing the Blue Danube. It was intended to calm the Jews going inside. Soap and towels in their hands, so no doubt believing they were taking in a bath. Except that it wasn't a bathhouse, but a crematorium. The Gypsy orchestra was there, the music helping to make a smooth transition for Jews from life to death. From the memories of my grandfather, I remember that in that region, Transnistria, where the Jews and Roma people were sent for extermination, he remembers that Jewish people were digging holes like graves for Roma, and Roma digging holes for Jews, and they were seeing that. They were just in front of each other. There are no exact numbers, but roughly it was estimated that between 220,000 and 1.5 million Roma people died during the Holocaust. Indeed, these are the things which we have to speak about. There is nothing to hide. This is so important to commemorate the past and draw conclusions, draw lessons. I hope that these lessons will, as I just started my speech, I hope that these lessons will help us build a better future for us and for our communities. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And again, oh, sorry. Yeah. Now it's Eurik Gilar. He's due to speak now for LGBT.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eurik. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm from the Czech Republic. I've spent most of my adult life in the UK, and I currently live in Ditchling with my wife and my son. Now, unlike some others here, I don't speak on behalf of a particular organization. I'm not an activist. But I identify as LGBT myself, and I practice as a therapist an approach that's actively inclusive and supportive of LGBTQ+ clients. Still, I don't feel like I can quite speak on behalf of the hugely diverse and rich group of people that fall under that label. I speak from inside of it, from my own experience. Quite aware that others have a very different experience in terms of how their status affects their lives and how they've been treated by others around them. When I was first asked to take a part in this, I hesitated. I almost refused. What should I even talk about? I mean, as far as LGBTQ people go, I have it easy, you know, it's straight passing, both at a glance and on paper. Most people who encounter me won't even realize I'm pansexual. Almost no one unless I tell them. My LGBT status is mostly invisible. It's something that hasn't brought me much trouble or hardship in life. Less so certainly than my Eastern accent that you can hear, especially now that I'm a bit nervous. Comes through with my voice. And CV, when I first came to Britain and I had no experience of working inside the country. So who am I to talk? How is my situation in any way relevant, especially in context of such extreme, unfathomable evil as the Shoah? And then the penny dropped. Just how many people who perished in the Holocaust weren't practitioners of Judaism, have never attended a bar mitzvah, or perhaps they have, but this wasn't something that their neighbors and friends knew about them. People perhaps had no idea that Ruth next door was Jewish, or hardly anyone cared in the bad sort of way, until suddenly someone did. And of course, being a gay man was one of the reasons in Nazi Germany to be sent to a concentration camp. The pink triangle, later reclaimed by the LGBT community and the Pride movement, was to gay men what the yellow star was to Jews. Some 50,000 men were sentenced for being homosexual during the war, and whilst most of them served their sentence in a prison, it is estimated about 10,000 of them ended up in concentration camp, while only 4 in 10 of them survived. Anecdotal evidence suggests that they were often singled out for especially cruel and humiliating treatment in what were already harsh and horrifying conditions. In Czechoslovakia in 1920s and 30s, LGBT people and gay men especially were unofficially silently tolerated for the most part between the wars. Generally, they had the option to remain invisible from the state's point of view, and most of them did. Sexuality was deemed quite a private thing. The pride ideals in terms of equal rights and visibility in society were not around yet. And being gay, let alone lesbian or bisexual, generally was a near invisible thing, something most people simply turned a blind eye on. And by the arguably by the standards of that time, that probably wasn't a bad thing, given what was happening to gays and lesbians around the world. But then the Nazis came. First to occupy the Sudetenland, some 6 months later to turn what was left of Czechoslovakia into the Böhmen and Mähren Protectorate. By then, the cogs of the Holocaust machinery had already begun to turn. Even though at that exact point in spring 1939, the worst of what we associate with Holocaust, the transport Auschwitz, was yet to come. We all know what came, what happened, mainly between 1941 and 45. What we don't know, no way of knowing, is what will come, our own future. If you told me when I first came to the UK a decade ago that I'll have to worry about my ability to stay here because the country will leave the EU, I would probably have laughed in disbelief. Disbelief, or so I'm told, wasn't an uncommon response to the hearsay, the whispers of what really was going on in the concentration camps back during the war. The sheer how and why would anybody do that? Today, here, I feel safe, and it is my hope I will continue to do so in this country, and the world at large will only become safer and a better place for my gay, trans, and queer friends and loved ones. There are pictures of me on the internet, some of them online, kissing guys, intimately cuddling non-binary bearded folks. My family and close friends know of my past, and even my fairly recent lovers of all genders. It doesn't seem to matter. I certainly don't feel threatened by it in any way, not where I live, not surrounded by the people I love. This goes back to my slight reluctance to come and speak here, as I was invited to do so primarily from my own experience. I'm very aware that I have transgender friends here in the UK and gay and lesbian friends in Europe, especially back in Czech Republic and in Poland, who will tell you a very different story. People who have experienced hatred, violence, and discrimination in the very recent times, even now. People who have been disowned by their families, abandoned by their friends, ostracized by their communities, who have experienced police brutality, inequality in the face of law, inadequate treatment or outright mistreatment by medical experts, and more. For me, here and now, things are rather good. History, as well as experience of my friends and my clients as a therapist in the Brighton area, tells me this might not always be so. And it certainly isn't to be taken for granted. Being invisible in one's difference, or at least having that choice, feeling safe in one's difference, professionally and socially, is not a guaranteed thing. It takes society that is truly free and open, which in turn is something that takes an ongoing effort and education. Otherwise, a photo from a decade ago might one day end one's career or even life, just like the wrong kind of a surname could nearly a century ago. The seeds of intolerance and hatred are ever present, and weeding out evil is a work that cannot end. Even in my family and among my fairly close friends, I have encountered people who disapprove, dislike, cannot understand why I would want to, more importantly choose to, relate to man and queer, gender non-conforming folk when I don't have to. When I could easily pretend to be and live as a straight man, unlike many who don't have that option. I had the privilege of stopping the dislike and disapproval from ever limiting what I can do, from ever causing me harm. But I had to challenge it at times, and it wasn't always a pleasant experience. Take away the privilege, my good fortune, and mine could have easily been, or could still turn out to be, a very different story. Clearly, work against violence, discrimination, othering, and divisiveness is never done. Let's try and do enough so that we can hope that to have learned from history and not, once again, to be left staring in horror disbelief.
Thank you so much, Eurik. That was very, very moving. And now the last speaker, not least, is Annie Ralph, that's going to talk about Lewes Refugees Group.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eurik.
Delighted to be here this evening. As Gaby said, I'm from the Lewes organisation in support of refugees and asylum seekers, and we cover the whole district. I'm a trustee, I'm one of the coordinators of volunteers, and actually I'm one of the founding members of the HMD group as well.
Right.
So I'm going to talk about the parallels, as has already been mentioned, between the circumstances that allowed the Holocaust and subsequent genocides, and the situation now, including current genocides. We saw and has been well illustrated this evening that the Holocaust was allowed, if you like, because groups, particularly Jewish people and individuals, were labeled as others. They were, their humanity was questioned, and an environment was created where people did not stand up. They turned their backs. Now, we have a situation in this country, which is very similar, called the hostile environment, a deliberate policy. But we have as well situations across the world where migrants, refugees, and groups are used as a distraction from the real issues. And this is particularly a policy, a deliberate policy of the populist movements we've seen in the States, in Hungary, where the world turns its back for its own convenience. Then the world turned its back for its own convenience, and the Holocaust happened. Now we see the world has stood by while genocides have taken place in Bosnia, in Rwanda, recently amongst the Rohingya people, and currently the Uyghurs in China. Then we saw the stark parallel between boats of Jewish refugees denied safety by many countries, including here in the UK. Now we see what's happening to migrants today, where global migration is one of the biggest issues, as well as climate change across the world. So we see what's happening to migrants today. We see boats turned back to certain incarceration and probably modern slavery in Libya, or people left to drown in unsafe waters, and rescue missions and rescue boats not being allowed to operate as they did previously. So we see the hostile environment here in the UK demonizing those, including children, who are simply trying to find a place of safety, a sense of belonging, and the chance of a future. Then we saw those children that were saved through kinder transport, their parents being denied entrance into the UK. As has already been said, many visas were refused. Many Jewish and other groups of people perished and were murdered in concentration camps as a result. Now we see unaccompanied refugee children denied family reunion in the law, despite the laws that are in place which allow them to do so. Children are forced to stay in unsafe camps on the borders of Europe and the UK, despite having the absolute right to join family members here in the UK. This is part again of the demonization and the labeling as others, which characterizes the hostile environment here in the UK, operating here today. So what do we do as LOSRAS? Well, we do two main things. One is we advocate for changes in laws and procedures to improve the lives and the life chances of refugees and asylum seekers. Secondly, we provide practical support to refugee families, individuals, and asylum seekers in the Lewes district. So we, our members, our fantastic members, advocate for changes in the law. We're part of a national group called Safe Passage, which aims and has had a degree of success to get this government in the UK to fulfill both the law and its promises to allow unaccompanied children, often in dangerous situations in Greece and in France, to name but a few countries, to join their families in the UK. And probably a mark of this is that Safe Passage have identified one of the MPs in this area, Maria Caulfield, as the most lobbied MP on the question of unaccompanied children and family reunion. Not unfortunately, that's managed to change the way she votes, but she has to listen. LOSRAS also works with another national organisation called Detention Action to end the practice of indefinite detention for people. Yes, we have legal indefinite detention in this country for people who've committed no crime other than seeking safety in the UK. We also support a campaign called Lift the Ban, which seeks to give asylum seekers the right to work when their claim is being considered, thereby taking them out of abject poverty. They get just over £5 a day to live on, and give them the chance to give something back to this country, which many and most are absolutely desperate to do, and also to claim some self-respect at the same time. So we have a group of dedicated volunteers who support refugee families and asylum seekers who live in the Lewes district, and that's the whole district. So through our volunteers, we provide practical support. For example, teaching English, which is incredibly important to allow people to feel that a sense of community and a place of safety, and also help children with their schoolwork, amongst many other things. So we've got the website if you'd like to contact us for more information or to join, or as Gaby said, to donate. But we would be delighted to hear from you, whether or not you wish to donate. That's not a barrier. So please do contact us. So I'm going to finish, hopefully on time, yes, by showing you a video. This was led by Domikles. You may have heard of them. They put billboards up during the Brexit campaign. This was projected onto the White Cliffs of Dover, where a refugee called Hassan Akkad brilliantly summarises the issues for asylum seekers trying to reach safety in the UK. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for attending this event.
Hello everyone. Apologies for taking over the cliff, but I have a few words that I would love to share with you. My name is Hassan, and 5 years ago, I was on the other side of this channel trying to cross here. These cliffs were actually visible from our makeshift camp, and they represented hope. Hope that I would live a safe and a stable life here in Britain, having fled my war-torn country. Similar to those who are arriving recently, I had to put my trust in a people smuggler, because a safe and a legal option to seek asylum here was and still is unavailable. Crossing the sea on a rubber dinghy is terrifying and devastating. Devastating because it makes you feel so helpless and insignificant, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Despite the growing number of people making the crossing to seek asylum here, Britain is not facing a refugee crisis. There are around 30 million refugees around the world, and Britain is home to only 1% of them. Britain is, however, facing other crises, but we are being used again as a distraction from the actual crises facing this country, caused by the people who are running it. I'll say it again, they are using us to distract you from how badly they have managed during this pandemic. The past few months have proved that the people who made Britain their home didn't hesitate to roll up their sleeves and keep this country running during the worst public health crisis in modern history. From harvesting our produce to stacking our shelves, from delivering our takeaways to looking after our elderly and sick, from driving our buses to, in my case, cleaning my hospital to help the NHS. The only difference between you and us is luck. We did not choose for our countries to become so unsafe that even the Deadly Sea offered a better prospect. The past few months have proved that wherever we come from in the world, we are united by the love and concern we hold towards our loved ones. Just like you, We want what's best for us and for our families.
Mhm. Thank you, Annie. Very brilliant ending to the talks. Thank you all our speakers. You've been absolutely wonderful. You've kept to time. I haven't had to nag at anybody, so thank you, thank you, thank you. Now it's time for questions, and I think our administrator Anne Locke is going to tell me. She was going to make a list of the questions. I don't know where she is. We'll take one question per speak. One question each from people who want to ask a question. Anne, I can't see you anywhere. Tim?
Yeah, I'm
here.
here.
There you are, Anne. Can you name the people who want to ask questions, because I can't get through my chat.
Right, I'm working up from the bottom. There are quite a lot of statements rather than actual questions. I think we need to ask for questions, perhaps to a particular speaker, and then broaden out from there.
Well, Tony Greenstein had a question. Tony, do you want to speak?
Okay, thanks. I posed a question and I quoted from someone called Yehuda Alkana. I don't know whether anyone has heard of him. He was a child survivor of the Holocaust, and he later he moved to Israel, and he also became rector of the Central European University in Budapest before Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, an anti-Semite, threw him out. And his question, and it's my question, is what is the purpose of remembering the Holocaust? He wrote an essay, a famous essay in Haaretz over 30 years ago, entitled The Need to Forget. And if I can quote just a very small part of it, he said, "Today I see the tragic and paradoxical victory of Hitler. Two nations, metaphorically speaking, emerged from the ashes of Auschwitz. A minority who assert this must never happen again, and a frightened and haunted majority who assert this must never happen again to us." And further down, he quotes Thomas Jefferson, writing that democracy and worship of the past are incompatible. Democracy fosters the present and the future, whereas the addiction to the past undermines the foundations of democracy. You can Google that, The Need to Forget, Yehuda Alkana, and you'll find the essay. So that is really my question. When you think of the way that Israel, for example, weaponizes the memory of the Holocaust in order to justify the apartheid state as it has become, is there a purpose in remembering the Holocaust?
Ooh, can I jump on that one?
Okay.
I'm really keen, because my talk went on too long, but I was kind of addressing that. I mean, if you look at the articles that I had on there, a number of them were from Israeli publications, and I think in Israel there's mixed opinion on how the memory of the Holocaust is used and when it's useful. And as I was saying, if you make it too special, it's useless. If you say it applies everywhere, it's also useless. And yet, sometimes it really, the memory of it does actually work. And what I didn't get to was a group in the States called Never Again Action, and they looked at what was happening with these kids being put in cages, and they just decided, yep, we've seen this movie, we know how it ends, and they started chaining themselves to fences and blocking traffic, and they just kept taking it seriously, even at risk of looking stupid, even at risk of somebody saying they were just doing it for their own self-aggrandizement. And in that case, it really worked. And they had a tremendous effect on the, they were a real inspiration to our group when we had the American crisis campaign, that there is a time to moral panic. There is a time to hit the panic button and say, yeah, it's happening now. And even at risk of looking stupid, even at risk of looking pompous. And I kind of, you know, I kind of thought about this, and I thought, in the end, what is it that separates a useful, when is it useful and when is it not? And I thought of two reasons. One is just kind of aesthetic. It's like good taste. And I mean, that's a very weak reason, and yet it's very powerful. It's people either go for it or they don't, and it's an emotional call.
David,
but the other thing is yeah.
You've heard of Gideon Levy, who is one of the principal commentators on Haaretz, which is Israel's only. No.
Tell me.
Could you just let David finish, please?
Well, I was just going to add so he could comment. Gideon Levy wrote about the thousands of Israeli students who go every year to Auschwitz. He said, if only one of them would then go from Auschwitz to the border at Gaza and say this must never happen.
Sure.
Again.
Well, and that was an important part of the American crisis thing is that, I mean, coming from America, Americans are terrible about this kind of thing. We like to think of ourselves as liberators, but we don't like to think about what we did to the Indians, and we don't like to think about slavery. And even at Biden's inauguration, there was a flag for the black MIA POW flag, which is, you know, kind of Americans feeling sorry for themselves about the possibility that the North Vietnamese could still be holding people without trial in prison camps, completely overlooking the fact that we've, you know, built Guantanamo Bay, and we have, you know, I can tell you their names. We've got them. They're there, and they still haven't had trials or charges, and our campaign is against that.
Thanks, David.
Okay.
Other people, thank you very much.
Sure.
Other people want to ask questions. Thank you.
Can I say something? Because I put a question down there.
Anne, yeah.
My video.
Can we see you?
No, the video's been stopped by the organizer, I think. I don't blame her. I was having my supper. Anyway, one of the things is, which actually supports what the last two speakers have said, I think, the particular horror of the Holocaust. You know, the efficiency of it, the appallingness of it is so extreme that we don't recognize the steps that lead to it. And I think that's what both of you are saying. And that business about Penn being booed by the Hamilton cast. But the point is, you know, the discrimination against Jews didn't start off with murder. It started off by, you know, excluding them and all of those things. And this is what we see in other parts of the world. And the refugee, Annie well described this. And I think, in a way, the appallingness of the Holocaust distracts us. People say, how dare you say this is like the Holocaust? But actually, it's like one of the steps towards it. And that's what we have to remember. Sorry.
Thank you, Anne. We've got another question.
That wasn't really...
It's fine.
It wasn't really a question. I wanted them
do you want to ask a question of the speakers, Anne? Do you want to ask a question of the speakers?
No. I wanted them to agree with me.
I agree with her.
Okay. I've got a question. This is for the panel, really, from Anastasia Christou. She says, apologies as the host has blocked our video access, but just a general question to all panel presenters. What kind of direct policy interventions would you like to see being implemented today, locally and globally, to ensure that history does not repeat itself? So could we have Dolmen or David, you've had a good speech, Paulo or Aluna or Eurik or Annie, do you want to say something to that?
I'm happy to say something.
Thank you, Annie.
Dolmen also.
Right.
Is it okay if I start, Dolmen? I want to talk about the, this is a really good question. Thank you very much. From the aspect of migration, and this also brings in the question of climate change, of course, is what we need is a recognition globally that migration is a global issue. It's not an issue between nations. It's not an issue of people trying to access safety in the West. It's an issue that the world needs to consider. It's the largest migration, and waves of migration have always happened throughout the recorded history of the human race. But we have an unprecedented challenge and an unprecedented situation with so many so much economic devastation and devastation by war and internal rife. There needs to be a global policy agreed worldwide and not left to the individual nation states or multinationals to design and implement their own specific policies, which are protectionist at the best and demonic at their worst.
Thank you, Annie. Paulo wants to say something, and who is it? Eurik or who wants to? We'll go with Paulo for next.
Yeah, and Dolmen wants to say
Dolmen,
something.
yeah.
I think the policy response to this is that we need better education. I think we need a reform of our children's curriculum, higher education curricula, because although we know some things about what happened in the Holocaust, most of us only know those things from the media, and we all know that the media will present what they choose to present for copy, for sensation, and so forth. What isn't done well enough and sufficiently is education of our children and young adults. So I would look at the education policy in the first instance. And then finally, I want to add is that racism is still not being recognised. It's still not being it's not taken seriously. All sorts of injustices occur within the criminal justice system that go uncontested and unchallenged, and we need to change that too. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Paulo. Dolmen, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what the last two panelists have said. I feel as regards policies that'll get implemented, we know that governments will only implement policies when they feel that people are sufficiently behind them. And I think, and interestingly enough, in connection with the link with the Holocaust, it feels that the German government has really tried to make steps to admit and process the atrocities that they've committed. Now, the British Empire has committed huge atrocities, and I think we are in denial of that. And I think because, and there's a lot of shame around that, which I know the Germans have had to deal with about what they've done. And I feel that our country is so worried about looking at what really happened that we retreat into this sense of, you know, the British Empire was great. And the ideas behind the British Empire, which is British were great. And this is still part of political discourse, isn't it? We need a world-beating vaccine policy, and we are the best. And people, of course, they're thinking about white people being the best. We are special. And I think that is behind, I think it's behind the racism, but I think it's also behind, you know, the many other ways that we're destroying the world and the injustice. So I think education and about our history, particularly about the empire, and different views about that from you know what we've actually done in the world.
Aluna, do you have any? Would you like to say something?
Can I just say, sorry, that quite a few of us can't get back on video, Gaby.
Well, it's not my. Sorry, it's I can't. I don't think we can do anything about it. It's,
I can't do it as a blanket bringing you all back. If you click on the little film camera with the line through it, it won't work. If you want to have your video put on, message me and I'll send you an invite to start your video, and I think that'll work.
Can you see us, Christine? Can you see everybody?
You, but it's sort of distracting that quite a few people you can see from their messages are trying to get their pictures back on and can't do so.
Well, maybe we can just listen. But thank you, Christine. We'll try and sort it out. We've only got 10 minutes or 7 minutes. Did anybody on the panel want to add to this discussion? Oh, hello, Christine.
No.
You're on there. Have we got any more questions from the from people out there?
Yes. Gabi, may I from Belgium?
Oh my goodness. He's a relative of mine.
Don't worry, I won't put politics and Israel in the debate. I would only tell you that in Belgium, for example, is you told Paulo about education. The big problem today, and don't categorize me as a racist. The problem is today the Arabs, the Muslims in the school, in the public schools, that don't accept the history. They don't like the name Jews or Israel, and so when they want to speak about history and the Shoah and the Holocaust, they refuse it. And so there was in Paris a teacher who has been killed because he spoke about Charlie. It's not on the caricature, the drawing.
Yeah, the cartoon.
So no, the teachers are very scared to speak about some subjects. And one of the subjects is the Holocaust. And so the history is, people are not aware. Slightly, with the time, the people are, and the witnesses, like our parents, Gabi, and they could go to school and testimony, they are gone now. And so, the Holocaust, as another people said before, it's only, with the media or something, but school is no more strong enough to carry the history.
Thank you, Claude. Can we ask anybody on the panel to respond to that? No?
Well, it's a generalization about all Muslims. That's all I would say. I'm not on the panel, but
Yeah.
I thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah.
I would say that is an extreme generalization, Claude.
No, I'm sorry. No.
I'm just let me finish. Just let me finish, please. I recognize that there are significant tensions and difficulties in relationships. I absolutely recognize that, and I'm not being partial. I'm not being on one side or the other, but I work with refugees and asylum seekers, most of whom are from the Middle East and most of whom are Muslim. And that's their consideration is for everyone in the world who is experiencing strife and internal displacement and incredible difficulties in their lives. It's a very complex subject. We probably are not going to deal with it here this evening. And it's something that I know people will have very strong views about.
Thank you, Annie. I think now we've come to 8:30. So I'm going to draw this discussion, sorry, Claude, to a close. And just thank Claude, and thank everybody for attending and for being so very well behaved, and to our wonderful panel who stuck really closely to time as well. So thank you very much. Thank you for attending, and I hope you look at the rest of the program. There is a concert on Wednesday, which is fabulous. So please, and there's some wonderful stories on our Facebook page. So if you've got some time, please